This is what avoidants do when you stop playing their game. You know that feeling. When you're constantly second-guessing yourself. When you're pouring energy into someone who gives you breadcrumbs in return. When you're showing up consistently, emotionally available, ready. And they're hiding behind a wall, keeping you just close enough that you don't walk away, but far enough that you never feel secure. That is the avoidant game. It's subtle. It's confusing, and it leaves you questioning your worth. But here's the truth. When you stop playing their game, everything changes, and not just for you, for them too. Avoidants thrive on distance. They push away intimacy because closeness feels like a threat. So they create this pattern, give you a little, then retreat, let you in, then vanish. Engage just enough to keep you hoping. And if you keep chasing, if you keep proving your worth, if you keep trying to make it work, you are unknowingly participating in the cycle that drains you. But the moment you step back, the moment you stop trying to decode their mixed signals, the moment you stop justifying their coldness and romanticizing the connection you wish existed, not the one that actually does, that's when the game ends. And here's what happens next. They feel it. Avoidants are not heartless, they're just scared. But when you disengage, when you refuse to participate in the tug of war, you take away the dynamic they've grown comfortable in. You remove the attention they relied on. You stop feeding the story they told themselves that love has to be earned through withdrawal and unpredictability. Suddenly, the silence they once used as a tool becomes a mirror. They have to sit with their own discomfort. They start questioning why your energy shifted. They wonder if they've lost their grip. And for the first time, they realize it, you're not waiting anymore. And that's powerful. Some will panic, some will reach out, but not because they're ready, not because they've changed. Just because they miss the feeling of being pursued. That's not love, that's control. Others will withdraw even further, disappearing completely. Don't take that as a reflection of your worth. Take it as confirmation that they were never ready to meet you where you deserve to be met. And then, there's you. You rise, you reclaim your peace. You stop performing for someone who can't appreciate front row seats. You stop proving that you're enough and start realizing that you already are. When you stop playing their game, you don't just change the dynamic, you change your story. And the next time you open your heart, it won't be for someone who runs from connection. It'll be for someone who stands still, stays present, and chooses you fully, freely, and every single day. Because love isn't a game, and you're done being a player in someone else's emotional hide and seek. Avoidants create emotional distance to stay in control while keeping you uncertain and chasing. They have a pattern that often feels like a puzzle. One moment they're charming, engaging, maybe even vulnerable, and the next they're emotionally cold, distant, or completely withdrawn. It creates confusion in you. You start wondering what you did wrong, what changed, and how you can fix it. That's exactly how they maintain control without ever having to ask for it directly. They don't chase, they let you do all the emotional heavy lifting. By keeping you guessing, they hold the power. You're constantly trying to win back the version of them that showed up at the beginning, and that pursuit keeps you tied to the relationship even when it stops feeling safe or healthy. They give just enough to make you stay, but never enough to let you feel secure. That in-between space is where they operate best because it keeps them in a place where they never have to risk true emotional intimacy. The avoidant often even see it as manipulation. They see it as protection. Somewhere along the line, they learned that closeness means danger, that vulnerability leads to pain or obligation. So instead of leaning in, they push away. Instead of speaking about their fears, they create distance, and they expect you to fill in the emotional blanks. This might look like them ghosting you after an intense date, brushing off serious conversations, or downplaying your connection the moment things feel too real. And when you confront them, they often make you feel like the problem. Too needy, too intense, too emotional. This subtle deflection keeps their walls intact and keeps you doubting yourself. As you continue chasing clarity, love, and reassurance, they pull further back. This is how they remain in control. They never have to face the emotional labor of building trust because they've trained you to overfunction while they underdeliver. Your constant efforts become their safety net, and the more you show up for them, the less they feel required to show up for you. It becomes a one-side connection disguised as something deep and complicated. But at its core, it's built on imbalance, it's built on your desire to connect and their desire to avoid. And the longer you stay in this game, the more you feel like you're asking for too much when really you're asking for the bare minimum. This dynamic isn't about love, it's about survival for them. But for you, it becomes emotional burnout masters devotion. Withdrawing your energy disrupts the pattern they rely on to feel safe and powerful. For someone with avoidant tendencies, emotional closeness feels overwhelming, threatening, and often triggering. So, they establish a rhythm that allows them to remain emotionally distant while still reaping the benefits of connection. That rhythm often involves you doing most of the work, reaching out, initiating conversations, showing vulnerability, and trying to keep the emotional bond alive. The moment you start pulling away, you're no longer playing your part in their script. That silence you create, intentional or not, becomes louder than anything you could say. It forces them to face the discomfort they've spent so long avoiding. You've shifted the dynamic, and now they're left with a version of themselves they rarely confront, one without control, one without emotional validation handed to them freely. They are used to being chased. Your affection and consistency are like a mirror they depend on to feel emotionally superior, even if they won't admit it. They often tell themselves stories like, "I don't need anyone," or "I'm better off alone." But deep down, there's often a fragile part of them that feels affirmed when someone fights to stay. When you withdraw, you remove that source of affirmation. You interrupt their illusion of emotional invincibility. You challenge the belief that you'll always be there, no matter how little they give in return. And that's a threat, not just to their ego, but to the emotional structure they've built to avoid vulnerability. Your detachment also removes the safe playground they've used to manage intimacy on their terms. They no longer get to call the shots. They can't disappear and return when they want, expecting you to be emotionally available at their convenience. The absence of your effort reveals the imbalance for what it is. Now, they are forced to deal with the silence, the unanswered texts, the lack of emotional comfort they once took for granted. And they start to question while it's happening. They might replay past interactions, scroll through old messages, or even convince themselves they didn't do anything wrong. But beneath all that analysis is one simple truth: they're no longer being pursued. The control they once had is slipping, and with it, the emotional safety they constructed through distance and avoidance. When your energy disappears, it highlights everything they didn't want to see about themselves and the way they show up in relationships. It becomes a mirror they can't turn away from. They're left wondering how things shifted so quickly, unaware that the change began the moment you choose your peace over their pattern. When you stop playing, they feel the shift and often react with confusion or panic. Avoidants rely on a very specific emotional rhythm to feel safe, one where they keep enough space to feel in control while receiving just enough attention to feel wanted without having to fully engage. So when you step out of that rhythm, when you stop texting first, when you don't chase their silence with concern, when you don't show up with the same emotional intensity, they start noticing the vacuum left behind. They feel the absence of the emotional fuel you were constantly providing. What they don't expect is how strongly your detachment disrupts their internal sense of control, how deeply it unsettles their emotional certainty. The confusion they feel often isn't logical because they may not have consciously acknowledged how much they depended on your emotional presence. They've trained themselves to believe they don't need anyone, that they're fine with space, that they're more comfortable alone. But now that you've stepped back, that space doesn't feel peaceful anymore. It feels cold, empty, and unnerving. They may begin to second-guess their decision to pull away. They might go through your old messages, question your silence, or subtly test your response by liking your posts, sending a vague message, or creating opportunities to see if you'll react. Sometimes the panic sets in quietly. It might look like them suddenly becoming more active on social media, indirectly broadcasting their presence, hoping you'll notice. Or it may come out as irritation, disguised concern, or sarcastic remarks if you do cross paths again. Underneath those behaviors is a deep discomfort. They don't know how to process the loss of attention without admitting they needed it. That contradiction is what confuses them most. They don't know why your absence bothers them when they told themselves they didn't care that much in the first place for avoidance. This disruption challenges their narrative. They were comfortable when you were reaching out, when you were asking to talk, when you were making the effort. Now they have to ask themselves questions they're not ready to answer. Did they take you for granted? Did they push too far? Did they mistake your love for weakness? But most of all, they wonder if you're gone for good. That thought creates anxiety they rarely acknowledge, even to themselves. And instead of confronting that anxiety head-on, they may try to re-establish the old rhythm, not because they want to change, but they want to feel in control again. They crave the familiarity of the chase, the pattern, the predictability of you showing up no matter what. Their reappearance isn't always about love. It's often about regaining attention or control. When avoidants come back after you've pulled away, it's tempting to believe it means they've changed, realized your value, or suddenly want to build the kind of deep connection you've been craving. But their return is often less about emotional clarity and more about discomfort with your absence. They miss the validation your presence brought them, the emotional safety net they didn't have to maintain, and the comfort of knowing someone was there to chase, respond, or stay available regardless of how inconsistent they were. Their outreach may appear sweet, thoughtful, or even romantic on the surface, but beneath it often lies a fear. Not of losing you, but of losing the power your attention gave them. They might send a casual message, something vague like, "Hey, how have you been?" Or even just react to a story, giving just enough signal to see if you'll engage again. If you respond, they might increase the effort slightly, only to return to old patterns once they feel the control reestablished. It becomes a cycle where they reach out not from a place of emotional growth, but from a place of emotional convenience. They crave the feeling of being wanted without the responsibility of reciprocating in a real, sustained way. That's why so many avoidants reappear only to disappear again once they sense the balance of power is restored. This isn't always done with malice or conscious intent. Many avoidants don't understand their own emotional cycles. They're reacting to discomfort, not necessarily forming a plan to manipulate. But the result is still the same. You get pulled back into a dynamic where your hopes rise, your heart softens, and then once again, you're left wondering what went wrong. This is why it's important to recognize that not every return is a sign of readiness. It's often a reflex, a way to relieve their own anxiety, not an act of emotional courage. They may say things that sound vulnerable or reflective, but if you listen closely, the focus is often still on them. How they feel, what they miss, how confusing it's been for them. Not on how you were affected, what you needed, or how they plan to show up differently moving forward. True change requires self-awareness, emotional accountability, and consistent action. Most avoidants haven't reached that place when they first come back. They're just trying to stop the discomfort, to fill the space your absence created, and to see if they still have the emotional influence they once relied on to feel secure. And disappearing completely is a reflection of their emotional limits, not your value. When an avoidant suddenly vanishes after you step back, it often feels personal, like rejection, like a confirmation that you never meant that much to them in the first place. But what's really happening has less to do with you and more to do with their inability to process closeness, accountability, and vulnerability. They don't have the emotional tools to face intimacy without shutting down. When their sense of control is threatened by your detachment, instead of leaning in, they retreat even further. It's not because you weren't worth it. It's because they were never equipped to handle emotional challenge without seeing it as pressure or danger. They often disappear as a way to reset their emotional baseline. The absence allows them to regain control internally, to escape the mirror your silence held up to them. That mirror can be uncomfortable because it forces them to consider how they contribute to their own dissatisfaction in relationships. But rather than engage with that discomfort, they choose the easier route, disconnection. They don't communicate, they don't explain, and they don't seek resolution because that would require vulnerability, and vulnerability requires growth. Disappearing allows them to avoid all of it. It gives them the illusion of safety without the responsibility of facing their emotional impact on someone else. This is why so many people are left without closure. The avoidant doesn't just leave you, they leave the conversation entirely. No explanations, no answers, no real goodbye. They walk away not because they didn't care at all, but because caring in a deeper, consistent, emotionally available way feels unsafe to them. And when you stopped playing their game, when you stopped showing up on demand, when you stopped accepting the bare minimum, that shift required a level of emotional engagement they weren't ready for. So instead of rising to meet that, they vanish. That disappearance is a defense mechanism. It's self-protection disguised as indifference, but it's not your burden to carry. You are asking for connection, clarity, and consistency, none of which are unreasonable. Their inability to meet you in those places does not mean you asked for too much. It means they were only capable of so little. It's easier for them to retreat than to evolve, and while it may feel like abandonment, it's more accurately a reflection of their emotional ceiling. When you hit that ceiling by standing in your self-respect, they have no choice but to exit, not because you were wrong, but because you were finally right in choosing yourself over their pattern, and your power returns the moment you stop proving your worth and start protecting your peace. When you've been caught in the cycle of trying to gain validation from someone emotionally unavailable, it becomes easy to lose sight of your own value. You start confusing their inconsistency with mystery, their silence with strength, and their emotional unavailability with depth. You spend time analyzing their behavior, wondering what you did wrong, and trying harder to be seen, chosen, or understood. All of that effort feels like love, but it's actually self-neglect disguised as loyalty. The moment you stop needing them to validate your importance, the moment you stop arguing for your value, something inside you begins to shift. You no longer place your worth in someone else's ability to recognize it. You stop performing, you stop managing their emotions. You stop anticipating their next move and start focusing on your own peace of mind. That silence you once feared becomes a sanctuary. You begin to realize how much energy you were giving to someone who wasn't meeting you halfway. You recognize how much were shrinking yourself to stay in something that only gave you temporary moments of connection followed by long stretches of doubt. That realization hurts, but it also frees you, because now instead of waiting for a text, a call, or a breadcrumb of attention, you begin to pour that attention inward. You start protecting your boundaries, not as punishment to them, but as protection for you. You stop second-guessing your feelings and start trusting them. If something feels off, you listen. If someone's behavior causes confusion, you believe what it's showing you. This is where your power is reborn, not in controlling what they do, but in deciding what you will no longer tolerate. You no longer operate from a place of emotional scarcity where you're grateful for any little bit of affection. You begin to expect presence, consistency, and honesty. Not because you're demanding, but because you've finally remembered who you are, and with that shift, you attract differently. You no longer chase people who are running. You stop explaining your worth to those who never had the capacity to receive it. You speak less and observe more. You become less available to confusion and more available to clarity. You don't just protect your peace, you prioritize it. And that energy, that unshakable knowing of your own value, becomes a filter. It naturally repels anything that isn't aligned with the love you deserve and draws in everything that honors the person you've fought to become.